Hello, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Douglas Johnson. I am a yoga and meditation teacher, ordained minister, and certified Kilobi Inquiries Facilitator. Today I'd like to talk about trusting yourself on the spiritual path or your healing journey, whatever you might call it or think about it, whatever your interest is. And it's an interesting question because there's a real paradox in this. If you listen to a teacher I really like, Adyashanti, he speaks about his early part in the path and how he went to study with one of his teachers. He went to do a retreat and he started talking about the teacher was asking how he was doing. And he said, well, you told me to do this, but I kind of feel like I want to do that. And the teacher very quickly said, there's no place for your ego here. You do what you were told to do, right? I'm not interested in your opinion. I'm not interested in what you want to do, what you feel is right. Now, a lot of people might feel like that's very harsh, especially in a Western context. You have to understand this was a Zen teacher. Zen comes from Japan. Japan and most Eastern traditions, they have a really high regard for the teacher. And this actually can be a problem, but it can also be a benefit. Everything is potentially a benefit and a problem, depending on what phase or stage you're in and what's going on. Okay, so we might think, oh, these Eastern countries, they slavishly follow the teacher, and that's not healthy and that's not good. And there's truth in that. But there also is a benefit. And this is what I want to talk about today, both the pitfalls and the benefits of trusting yourself, trusting others. So very quickly shut down Adya's impulse to just do what he wanted, right? But you told me to do this, but I feel like that. He was like, no, you do what I told you to do. So Adya did that. And then he said, months later, when he was checking in, he wrote his teacher and he said, I still feel that pull to do this other thing, but I'm doing what you told me to do because you said to not listen to that. And he said, at that point, his teacher wrote back and said, why don't you do the thing that you feel inspired to do? Okay, so the paradox here is usually early on in our spiritual path, and early on, it's difficult to say how long early on lasts. For some people, early on might actually last their entire life. Okay, it just depends. For others, early on might be, a week or a month or a few months or maybe a couple of years. Early on, you can't trust yourself. You don't want to trust yourself. You want to find a teacher who you feel you can trust. And then you pretty much want to listen to them and follow their advice as closely as you can early on. Okay? Because most of us our emotional guidance system has been hijacked. This is the best way I can put it. Very few of us are raised in a way that once we are an adult, we can trust ourselves. Okay? Most of us are raised in a way where by the time we're an adult, there has been a substantial amount of damage done to our emotional guidance system. My feeling, my sense is that we naturally have a guidance system that works for us. So in an ideal world, we would be raised in a way where we become adults, and we're going to be different, folks. Everyone is looking for some kind of master key. Everyone should be vegan. Everyone should be this religion. Everyone should do these practices. It really doesn't work that way, okay? Everyone should have this job or that job. That's not what we're here to do, folks. It's not what we're here to do. We're not here to all be the same, okay? We are here to express spirit in our own unique way. And what that looks like for every individual is going to be different, rightfully so, okay? So if you're thinking, oh, everyone, I'm experiencing the love of Krishna through, chanting Hare Krishna, everyone needs to do that. Well, not everyone's going to experience what you experience, and no, everyone does not need to do that. You can share your experience with others, and you might find others who benefit from it, but you will also find people who don't. So this one size fits all, it's not appropriate. It's not correct. It's not right. In an ideal world, we would grow up in a way where we could trust our guidance system, our emotional guidance system. It's there for a reason. And when something or someone crossed a boundary, we would not have a problem communicating that, setting boundaries, healthy boundaries. We would also not have a problem with loving other people and getting attached to people in a loving way. Many people have these different styles of attachment that come from, again, trauma, childhood trauma, from the way we were raised. So this is why we cannot completely trust ourselves when it comes to this aspect. Because what we'll find is the damage that's been done to our guidance system, we can't trust it. So I'm in a situation that a healthy person might find invigorating or educational or helpful. And if my guidance system is damaged, I might get triggered in that situation. I might feel threatened. I might feel that I need to leave. I need to get out of there. I need to maybe even attack somebody. So this is when we have this kind of damage, and I'll be very clear, most of us do, unless you've done a lot of work on yourself. And I mean a lot. And I'm talking more than just doing some yoga postures. And probably more than just meditating, but meditation, if it's done in the right way, it over time can work through these things if approached in the right way. But I find most people do not learn meditation in the right way. So we can't trust ourselves. We can't trust our feelings. We can't trust, oh, I need to get away from this. I need to get away. So this is worth keeping in mind, because if we're on this path, we very often will experience a sort of, I don't know, an attraction and then an aversion to certain practices, traditions, teachers. And we'll be drawn to something for a while, and then we'll reject it, and we'll push it away. And then we'll be drawn to some other preacher or teacher or style, and then we'll push it away. And this can be a sign that when we're getting to a point where the practices are truly going to be transformational and helpful, that's when we start to actually push away. That's when we start to feel like, well, no, I don't want any more of this. So we need to be very mindful of this. So if we ask, can I trust myself? Can I trust my feelings? My general answer would be early on. And again, early on could last a lifetime for some people. It's just the way that it is. Okay, I'm just being really honest with you, depending on how you're working, if the practices you're doing are effective or not, the type of guidance that you have, the amount that you're willing to devote to this. Many people, in fact, most people, I'd say, they go through life and they never heal themselves from a spiritual perspective. They die with all of this trauma in place. They don't ever do the work of healing themselves. And so in a sense, they really can't trust themselves. And what do I mean by that, right? What's the outcome? Because you might be like, well, I've just been trusting myself and everything's fine. Yes, you might be fine. Not saying disaster will strike if your emotional guidance system is damaged, but you probably will not live with a deeper sense of peace, joy, belonging. There is a potential that we have as human beings for a very profound level experience of just peace or belonging in this world, where we really feel like we belong here and we love being here and we're excited about the next day, not because anything special is necessarily going to happen. It just, this life is amazing. We hear that, don't we? We hear, oh, life is a miracle, but do we feel that? Do you feel that your life is a miracle, that every moment is an opportunity? Most of us don't. So we have this potential, and I believe, I can't prove this, but I believe if we had our guidance system intact from childhood, that would then guide us to that flow in our life, where we're experiencing what the Taoists might call the Tao, the way. There's a certain flow. You are a part of this universal flow, and you can feel that you are. You feel that kind of connectedness. So, early on, especially, and again, early on, however long it lasts as long as it lasts. Early on, when the inner teacher's voice has not been heard or awakened, when we're guided by our damage and our trauma, then we very much cannot trust ourselves. And this is the role of the teacher, whatever form it takes. The teacher is the voice. A good human teacher or embodied teacher is someone who can help you begin to hear the still small voice inside yourself, okay? Because we all have it in here. So we can call it Spirit, Holy Spirit. Some people refer to it as Shakti, Ishvara. Depends on how you want to look at it, what tradition you're plugging into. But this idea is very common in different traditions. So Christianity, yoga, we have life inside of us, right? The Word of God, that breath that the divine breathed into the universe. How can we be separate from that? We are a direct outcome of that. So this can guide us if we know how to listen. if we know how to connect. Okay? Our current culture and lifestyle is very good at disconnecting us from that. Very, very good at it. So again, by the time most of us are adults, we don't know what to listen to. We don't know how to hear that voice anymore. So if we're lucky, and I'm not sure how much luck has to do with it. I think the old saying, when the student is ready to teach your peers. So if we're lucky, if we're ready, a teacher appears in our life and they start to echo the inner teacher. That what they are saying in words, what the inner teacher is telling us. And usually this will be experienced as a sort of like recognition, almost like you're remembering something. A teacher will say something and you'll be like, wow, somehow I know that to be true. I can't prove it. Maybe no one else has ever said that, right? Because a lot of times we're told, do the smart thing, do the wise thing, work hard, try and please other people, all these kinds of things. And the teacher might say very, very different things. And this is why some people get triggered. This is why some people might think that certain teachers are actually dangerous with what they're saying. But the teacher is coming from a very different perspective. And so over time, we learn to listen inwardly. We get better and better at listening inwardly to this inner teacher's voice. And then at a certain stage or a certain point, we might find that inner guidance is asking us to do something very specific to us. So it may not be something our teacher, the physical teacher, is speaking about. Now, it doesn't mean we need to be like, forget old teachers, or now I have to strike out on my own. Again, Adya is a great example of someone who he stuck with his teacher, even though he began to feel this pull to do something different, and his teacher gave him permission to do that. He pretty much did what the teacher said until the teacher said, yeah, I think it's a good idea for you to follow your instinct on this. And he makes the point when sharing that is very indicative of a good teacher, that the teacher wants to be sure you're not being guided simply by ego. And so the teacher will say, hey, no, don't do that. Stop that. And they want to see, will you listen? Do you follow the advice? And then if it's something that is legitimately the inner teacher, because again, we are different. You are unique. We are not separate, but we are different, okay? So just like my 5 fingers, they are not separate, they are all connected. They are all part of one organism. They will not survive on their own. If we remove one of my fingers, it will not survive separate from the hand. And yet, this finger is not this finger, right? It's not this finger. So is it correct to say all my fingers are the same? No, that would be incorrect. My fingers are different. Are they separate? No. So this is important for us to understand, because we are not separate, and yet we are different, okay? So when we get deep enough, far enough in the spiritual path, It's not to say that we can't have a teacher. It's not to say that our teacher can't help us, but we will begin to find that what we need to do specifically will come more and more from an inner guidance or inner voice. So I have students who have gone very deep with me, and they have learned many, many tools. And at this stage, they often sense or know what tool they need to use. And then, of course, if they get lost, they can reach out to me at any time. But when I speak with them, a lot of times I find that they're managing great on their own. They get the sense that, oh, I'm using more pranayama these days because of X, and it seems to be helping. Now again, what is our measure? What does helping mean? What are we looking for? Well, if you are sick emotionally, psychically, spiritually, physically, then you could say your first goal is perhaps to heal. And then once you feel that you have healed, I'd say the next step or phase is joy, bliss, peace, entering into that flow of life, feeling connected with life itself. So early on, again, very often, I'm never going to say something always applies or is always true, because who knows, right? But I wouldn't assume you're the assumption for no reason. I would find a teacher that you trust and let them tell you you're the exception. And finding a teacher you trust can be tricky. And again, I often would go with that initial sense. You know, early on, you might be flitting around from one teacher to another. But if you meet a teacher who really talks about unbridled bliss and joy and enlightenment and the end, you know, of suffering, things like that, then you may have found a teacher who is confident that they have experienced these things for themselves and that they can help you experience these things. This isn't to put down any kind of teacher, because I think every teacher has their place and they have their audience and they're doing their job. But in modern yoga, you have many teachers who essentially see themselves as a fitness instructor. Maybe they know a little bit about yoga philosophy, but they see their job as just helping you feel a little better. They're not really talking about dismantling the ego. In fact, I've met several yoga teachers who say, oh, you need the ego. In modern life, you need the ego. If you were in an ashram, you can get rid of your ego, but you need the ego to live in the modern world. Maybe. It might depend on what we're defining the ego as and what kind of role it plays. I don't know if we can ever completely eliminate the ego. I just don't know. I don't know. But if it stays around, it stops functioning in the way that it did previously. I believe there's a book, I haven't read it, but a book called Turning Your Ego into an Ally. And so this would be the idea, that if the ego is still there, it becomes a servant to spirit rather than life serving the ego. And in the yoga tradition, this is usually, I learned anyway, by one of my teachers, that this was depicted by Hanuman. And it's said that the mind is an amazing servant and a terrible master. So the ego, we could say the ego is a wonderful servant and a terrible master. if I am being guided by, again, my ego, my deficiency story, my sense of lack, my sense of being unlovable, then I will be tortured. I will not enjoy life. How can I enjoy life? Going through life feeling deficient, feeling like I'm not good enough, feeling like I'm unlovable. And I'll remind all of you that this is usually unconscious. When I meet someone who's aware of these thoughts, I usually regard that person as being quite awake. It doesn't mean that they don't have a lot of other things to work on, but that awareness alone, I don't like myself. I don't like myself. That's huge, because many people go their whole life running away from that awareness, and they will do everything they can to cover it up. So they will, again, become a perfectionist. They will try and leap over higher and higher bars. They will try and make more money. They will try and get more sex. They will drink more, do more drugs, gain more power, all in an attempt to fill this hole that cannot be filled by any of those things, which is, again, love. So, early on, my advice to most people is don't trust yourself. Find a teacher who you can trust, and then trust their guidance. Make sure that they are prepared to take you the whole way, the whole distance, okay? That they have done that for themselves and that they are confident that they can do that for you. This does not mean they are perfect, okay? I personally, and I've met a lot of teachers, have not met or heard about a teacher who's perfect. Teacher might have a lot of loving energy. They may even perform miracles. That does not mean they are perfect. I had a student once who met someone who had a real gift. And basically, long and short of it, this person with this gift got them to compromise and compromise their values and their beliefs, because they figured, well, if this person has this gift, they must be really spiritually advanced or realized. That is not true. That is not true. And there are stories from the yoga tradition about this, where people, and in one of my favorite Zen books, they talk about how people can learn to manipulate these special powers. That does not automatically mean that they are an enlightened master or that they're even very wise at all. So we need to be very, very cautious, especially about people who display these things with the idea that, oh, look at what I can do, so now you're going to follow me or listen to me. Be very, very cautious of this kind of a scenario. So find a teacher you can trust, and then listen to them. Again, make sure they can take you the full distance. Doesn't mean they need to be perfect, but they are confident that they can lead you through the journey inward, through the types of pitfalls and things that happen along the way. Reach out to them. If you can't, if they are someone who's very difficult to get in touch with, then you probably need to find a different teacher. And this is one thing that we find often in the modern setting. There are some amazing teachers out there right now who publish books and are basically famous, very well known, and it's difficult to interact with them. It's difficult to ask them a question. You can't interact with them. Maybe you could go on a retreat in some foreign land and get one question in, which do that. I recommend that. That would probably be very, very valuable. But I also think you need a teacher who's more accessible. And you might think, well, the famous teacher is going to be the better teacher. I don't see it that way at all. What makes us famous, what allows us to reach a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily reflect quality. So even if you're in love with Eckhart Tolle's teaching or someone else's teaching, see if you can find someone locally or maybe on the internet, but someone who you can text back and forth with or email back and forth with or have a Zoom meeting with, someone who you can interact with directly so you can ask questions, because questions, curiosity is going to be so important on your journey. And then at a certain point, what you should find in a legitimate teacher, and if you don't, this could be a reason to move on, is at a certain point, the teacher is just going to allow you or even encourage you to start to follow your own guidance. Now, again, this has nothing to do with time. I have students who have been studying with me in one form or another, or been following me in one form or another, who maybe for even decades or over a decade. And as far as I'm concerned, they're not ready to trust themselves yet. They have a lot of conditioning that is still dictating their choices. And as a result, there's still a good amount of suffering. And the odd thing is sometimes we don't even know. So there are also people who have been with me a much shorter amount of time, but for whatever reason, they might already be ready to start sort of following their own intuition and guidance. Now, as I said earlier, it's not really an ultimate right or wrong or good or bad. One of the characteristics of the modern setting is that to a large degree, we do have autonomy. In a more traditional setting, very often to study with a serious teacher, you might have to give up your worldly life. You might have to sell your home if you have a home. If you have a family, you might have to leave your family. And you would probably make a very large offering to your teacher. And they would essentially take you in, almost like a child. They would take you in, they would take responsibility for your well-being. It might be in their home, if they're a householder, or it might be in a monastery or an ashram. Okay, so in that context, once you've entered into that relationship, you're pretty much a dependent. Yes, maybe you could leave and get a job or something, survive, but in many cultures and in many times, many respects, you were essentially, that was your life. That was it. You were going to be under the guidance of that person, so that you didn't have this freedom to engage and disengage when you wanted. You didn't have the freedom to come and go. It was much harder to do that. Also, teachers could have been much more difficult to find. Things like travel were difficult. Things like finding information was difficult, right? I'm not saying it can't be done. There were stories of Zen teachers who they would study with a teacher and then feel like, they couldn't get any further and they might go to another teacher. But remember, this is different than, oh, I am repulsed by that teacher, or I don't like what they're asking me to do, or whatever it is. It's very different. Feeling like, okay, And again, this is where we trust ourselves at a certain point. And so that's something you want to look for, that at a certain point, and maybe very early on, some teachers don't teach in a super strict or structured way. It's just not their style. And some people might need that. Some people might need a drill sergeant early on. Whether or not you can stay with that drill sergeant will depend largely on whether the drill sergeant knows that that is a phase and that they need to let off at a certain point. Because again, the inner teacher awakens, and when the inner teacher awakens, then our practice becomes more nuanced. It becomes much more nuanced. And at that point, again, it doesn't mean we have to reject our community or our teacher. We can still take part. And what I love is on some of the retreats that I've done more recently, I've had students who've done mini retreats at this point, and again, been with me for years, if not over a decade. And you see them stepping into the role of teacher. And just because we don't make our living teaching spirituality doesn't mean we're not a teacher. It doesn't mean we aren't spreading this love and this experience through everything that we do, and every word and every glance that we have. I was talking with a young woman the other day, and she was a very devout Christian. And she was talking about looking for work, and she had initially wanted to find ministry work. But then she realized that it seemed like at this time she was being called to work a more secular job, and for her ministry, spreading the word of God, if you will, to be something that she does more on a, you could say, personal or one-on-one basis. Again, in conversations with people, and how you interact with people, how you treat people. All of this communicates. We're communicating constantly what we believe we are, what we believe God is, what we believe others are, okay? So we don't need to get paid. Being paid as a teacher is a specific role, but it doesn't mean that a teacher who isn't paid is a lesser teacher, isn't more realized than someone who's getting paid to do it, and maybe isn't even a better teacher. So one place where we often take on the role of teacher, maybe not knowing it, is in parenting. And one of the biggest things you can think about if you are a parent is modeling. Not what you say, not what you tell your children, but how are you living your life? So again, what I would encourage is a life of joy and peace, feeling connected with life, not like it's a struggle, not like you're fighting with life. Can you find that experience of flow? And then demonstrate that to your children, that this is possible, because the narrative coming from the culture at large is that it's not possible. That generally speaking, you're born a sinner, something is wrong with you fundamentally, the way that you were created. And again, we often learn this in our family of origin early on. Our parents, in trying to discipline us, very often, without realizing it, communicate that there's something fundamentally wrong with us. They fail to make the distinction between bad behavior and bad person. So again, they are doing the best that they can. So please don't take this and then call up your parents after and say, you did this to me, Again, the vast majority of us have this, myself included. Okay, we were raised in this way, and so if you are struggling with self-approval, self-love, yes, your parents probably played a role, but they also probably struggled with it, maybe more than you have, and they may not have ever had the gift of becoming aware of it. So if you're aware that this is something you struggle with, then congratulations. This is very good news. So, can we trust ourselves on a spiritual path? No, and you absolutely have to. That's the answer. Again, a paradox, which is very common in spirituality. And my general rule of thumb, again, is early on, you need to question your feelings, your beliefs, your ideas, your sense of right and wrong. You need to question these things in a safe manner, in a relationship with someone who you feel that you can do that. And it may not be a cuddly, friendly, even loving relationship in the sense of like a familial love. I know many people who they didn't have that kind of relationship with their teacher, but they felt they could trust their teacher to be honest. They felt that they could trust their teacher to have their best interest in mind. And this is the key. Again, it doesn't mean your teacher's perfect. It doesn't mean they won't necessarily slip up. But if they do, they will catch themselves and they will correct course. Again, I haven't really met a human teacher, an embodied teacher, who wasn't human. I just haven't. In the Christian tradition, Jesus is said to be fully human and fully divine. And I think we can meet teachers like this. But again, they're fully human. And I actually think you see this in the story of Jesus. You see those human moments. And I think that makes it that much more compelling and beautiful because we can relate, right? We can sympathize. If it's just this God being, then there's no relation there. We can't really relate. So I think it's a beautiful, beautiful story, and he's a beautiful example of a teacher. So early on, question, listen, explore through inquiry. Why do I feel, if the teacher's just, and you're like, oh no, I remember I had a conversation with someone I was very close to, and I was going to go through a initiation ceremony, and they really were triggered by that. I was like, this is what's required. I do this initiation, like what's wrong with it? But for them, it was something that they felt like they couldn't do. They didn't want to do that. This is an example. Let's question what's going on there. I'm not saying everyone needs to go through initiation. I don't even have an initiation in my Sangha, my community, but other teachers do, and there's probably a reason that they do, and it probably makes sense in the way that they teach and the tradition that they're teaching from, and the effectiveness of all of that. So that's a good example of that. Examine that. Look at that. Where is that coming from? Is it coming from spirit? Is it coming from ego? And I don't know that I can answer that for you. I might have a hunch. It might be a very strong hunch. And you want to be careful, because remember, the ego generally speaks first and it speaks loudest. So if you ask the question, the first thing that comes up, the knee jerk, is usually the ego. And again, it's usually loud. So this is why in spirituality, you need to get quiet, you need to get still, and you need to listen. And the answer that comes from that process, that is probably an answer that you can trust. So questioning things early on, trusting the guidance of a guide, a teacher of some sort, whatever form it takes. And then later on, once we've cleaned up a lot of the emotional, psychological, and mental mess that has been created through being brought up in a modern culture. And I don't know that it was any better in the past, just to be clear. In fact, it might even be better today than it ever was. I don't know. All I know is what I see today. And so what I see today is most people never reach spiritual maturation. They go to their graves essentially as spiritual children. They never heal the wounds that may be inevitable. I honestly don't know if it's possible to get through childhood and if it's possible to create an environment and a culture where children don't have some emotional scarring. It's sort of like growing up and getting out on your bike. I remember I used to bike a lot as a child, and I would fall and skid my knees, right? And my parents weren't like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. They would just take me and slap a Band-Aid on it, maybe give it a kiss. My mother used to kiss and make it better when I was young. And then send me on my way, and I was back on my bike, maybe after a few tears were shed. So physically, is it possible to come up through childhood without some injuries and things happening along the way? Getting sick every now and then. Getting sick every now and then actually makes the immune system stronger. All that play and falling and all these things, it actually helps us develop our sense of balance and know our limits. I don't know that you want to rid yourself of that completely. So maybe the same is true psychologically. Maybe we need to go through a period where we are psychologically damaged, but then just as important is we then have to heal. And this is the thing that has been perhaps lacking up to this point in most cultures, is how do we heal those wounds so that we can then live a fulfilling life. And again, suffering is a great barometer. How much suffering is there? We can talk about being free from suffering. For the most part, I think yes. We do not want to feel that we are suffering all the time. There may be periods of suffering. There might be dark nights. There might be things that come up that trigger something that was very deep in the unconscious that causes suffering for a period of time. But in general, what we want to see is that there's much more joy and peace than suffering. There's much more bliss than suffering. There's a lot of joy at being alive. So keep an eye on those things. And then once you're ready, again, a teacher, you can ask a teacher, or you can maybe get a sense yourself. Your teacher, again, may have a very hands-off approach, and they may have a very come to me when you need me, seek me out when you need me kind of approach. And so you may just begin to get a sense. And again, what you want to look for is there this sense of increasing freedom, peace, joy, love, connectedness, or are you struggling to find that? And if you're struggling, don't be afraid to find some guidance and to reach out. This is one thing I see in our culture that many people have because of our fiercely sort of independent nature, and the United States in particular, but I think in modern society in general, there can be a real reluctance to reaching out for help, asking for guidance. We think we're supposed to be able to do it on our own. But yet, we don't have a problem hiring a plumber when we need a plumber. We don't have a problem paying for a mechanic to fix our car, right? We have professionals, people who do things for a living. Sure, you might be able to fix your own car, watching YouTube videos, opening up the manual, maybe going back to school and learning about mechanics. But do you really want to do that? Why? Why not let someone who's an expert in that field, who has training and experience that you would have to pay and spend a lot of time on, why not let them help you whenever possible? Okay, so again, this is just solid advice. But just like with what I'm speaking about, there is a yin and yang relationship too. Never get dependent either. So again, we're really looking for this fluidity. I reach out when I need to. I'm not afraid to do that. And yet at the same time, I'm fiercely independent. I'm asking questions. I'm looking for answers. Again, I'm not afraid to take instruction. I'm not afraid to hear things that I maybe don't want to hear. Might be difficult to hear. I might not even believe at first. But again, until I'm ready, and you might want to let someone else tell you when you're ready, you don't want to assume that you know the way. Because if you knew the way to bliss and peace and freedom, you would already be there, wouldn't you? Isn't that what we all want? Isn't that what we're seeking in this world through our play here? So if I know how to get there, then great. You don't need anyone else. But if you're not there, you might want to consider asking for help. Okay? Don't be afraid to do that. And again, even if you've been studying for a very long time, even if you're an advanced practitioner, okay, even if you've been meditating for decades, you still may be able to be helped by an interaction with a live teacher listening to your specific situation and addressing that one-on-one. All right, everyone, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, do consider contributing to help me continue doing this work. This work is made possible mostly by my patrons on Patreon, and other people who support me through by making a contribution on PayPal or Venmo. Thank you all so much, and until next time, namaste, and have a beautiful day.